God's chosen ones, 7 hidden pains that only the chosen ones experience, that no one ever sees. There are people who live difficult days, and then there are people who carry entire deserts inside them. If your journey has felt heavier than most, if silence felt like God's answer and your prayers returned without echo, maybe it's because you're not being punished. Maybe it's because you're not like the rest. Chosen ones aren't born on mountaintops. They're carved in valleys. The tears you thought disqualified you were the very ink God used to write your calling. And if your heart has ever whispered, why did it have to hurt this much? This isn't just a message. It's a divine remembrance. Naomi couldn't remember the last time she truly laughed. She still showed up to work every day, still wore her name badge, still carried that gentle look in her eyes that patience loved. But inside, she was empty. There was a time she led the prayer circle, had sticky notes with scriptures on her bathroom mirror. There was a time she believed, a time she knew God was with her. But now her prayers barely made it past the ceiling. She worshipped, but mostly in silence, head bowed, trying not to fall apart. She whispered into the dark, "God, what did I do wrong?" There were nights she curled up on the bathroom floor, clutching a baby onesie no one ever got to wear. She had lost the child she prayed for. Then she lost the man who promised forever. They left, and so did her hope. People say God loves those who suffer. But Naomi started to wonder, if he loves me, why did everyone else leave? No one saw the war inside her. No one heard the scream she swallowed every night. Because surely, if you're chosen by God, you wouldn't be this broken, right? But what Naomi didn't know, what the enemy never wanted her to realize, was this. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't abandonment. It was the calling. She wasn't being cast aside. She was being set apart, not to break, but to be built in secret. And God's silence? It wasn't rejection. It was the sacred stillness that falls right in the middle of the test. Heaven's whisper. You thought the pain meant you failed. But child, it was your proof that you were chosen. Part 1. The silent exit. When God starts separating you, it didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just slower replies, fewer phone calls. Then the invitation stopped, the laughter faded, and one by one, they left. Naomi tried to understand. Did I say something wrong? Did I become too much? She rewrote text messages in her head, replayed every conversation. But no matter how many times she retraced her steps, they were gone. Friends who once held her hand in church now walked right past her in the store. Even her sister, the one who used to call every morning, suddenly became too busy. It wasn't just people, it was places. The Bible study that once felt like home now felt like a cold room full of polite smiles and shallow nods. The conversations that once lit up her soul, now they barely scratched the surface. She sat on her couch one night, staring at a photo of herself surrounded by people who swore they'd always be there. She held the frame in her hands and whispered, "What did I do wrong?" But heaven whispered something else. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're just becoming someone they no longer recognize." This wasn't rejection, it was separation. God wasn't punishing her, he was preserving her. She wasn't being cast out, she was being called out. Like oil separating from water, Naomi's spirit was rising, and everything that couldn't go where God was taking her began to fall away. She opened her Bible to Matthew 13, and her eyes landed on Jesus' words. "The prophet is not without honor, except in his own town." Tears welled up. Even Jesus, Son of God, was dismissed by the very people who watched him grow. "Isn't that the carpenter's son?" they said. like familiarity could cancel divinity. Naomi closed her Bible and sobbed, not because she was weak, but because it finally made sense. God wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to make her hear him. He needed the silence. He needed the space. He needed to clear the stage so his voice could take center spotlight. Because some revelations are too sacred to be shouted over the noise of shallow company. And the truth is, some of the people who left didn't do it out of malice. They left because they were spiritually incompatible with where Naomi was going. Their season in her life was over, like leaves falling in autumn, not because they were bad, but because new growth required it. She missed them, yes, but for the first time, she began to see that the empty space around her was holy ground. God had been pulling her close, not pushing her away. He whispered, "Lord, it hurts, but if it's you, I'll stay in this silence." And heaven whispered back, "Good, because the silence is where I reveal who you really are." Naomi didn't know it yet, but what felt like a social collapse was actually spiritual consecration. This was the exit before elevation. And when God finishes molding the chosen, he never sends them back the same. Part 2. Alone, but not abandoned. The H of purposeful loneliness. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Naomi had known both. She sat in a crowded break room at the hospital, listening to the noise around her. Laughter, gossip, someone scrolling TikTok on full volume, but none of it reached her. She sipped her lukewarm coffee slowly, quietly, wondering if anyone even noticed she was there. They talked about vacations, promotions, baby showers. She tried to smile, she even laughed once. But inside, it was hollow. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of trying to force herself into conversations that had no room for her depth. That night, she walked home under a violet sky, asking the question that had lived in her chest for months. Why do I feel so invisible, even when I'm surrounded? And God answered, not with a thunderclap, not with a miracle, but with a memory. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, called to speak truth to a people who didn't want to hear it. Set apart before birth, sent to warn, to wake, to weep alone. Naomi remembered his words from Scripture. I sat alone because your hand was upon me. Jeremiah 15:17. And suddenly she understood. This loneliness wasn't random. It wasn't punishment. It was placement. A divine kind of ache that only the called experience, not because they are unloved, but because they are under assignment. Naomi wasn't misunderstood because she was broken. She was misunderstood because she carried something sacred, something uncommon, in a world that only recognizes the ordinary. The loneliness was proof that she wasn't walking in the crowd's rhythm. She was walking in God's timing. Yes, the ache was real, but so was the anointing. She began to notice the shift. People didn't understand her passion for the word. They rolled their eyes when she talked about dreams or discernment. She tried to shrink to fit in, but the fire inside her wouldn't let her. Because you can't carry oil and expect to blend in. This kind of loneliness didn't mean she was forgotten. It meant she was being hidden for something holy, like Moses in the desert, like Elijah by the brook, like Jesus in the wilderness. God wasn't withholding community, he was creating communion. And so Naomi stopped fighting the silence. She stopped begging for tables that no longer had a seat for her. She stopped chasing friendships that only wanted the old her. Instead, she opened her journal. She poured her heart out in midnight prayers. She started walking without headphones, letting heaven speak through the wind. because loneliness had become a chapel, and she realized, I'm not alone. I am just in training for a kind of connection only the called can carry. Her purpose didn't make her better, but it did make her different. And different will always be lonely until it's time to lead. Heaven's whisper? This loneliness is not your prison. It's your preparation. It's the sacred stillness where I stretch your spirit. So when I send you out, you won't need applause to know you are enough. Part 3. The War Within. Why you're still struggling. Naomi sat in her car in the hospital parking lot. It was her lunch break, but she hadn't touched her food. Her hands were still shaking from earlier. She had snapped at a patient, someone who just needed kindness. The guilt flooded her like a storm surge. God, what's wrong with me? She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel. Yes, and I still struggling like this. No one saw it. No one heard the inner war. To the world she looked fine, professional, calm, composed. But inside it was chaos. She still believed, still prayed. It still served. But her thoughts? They didn't always line up with her faith. Some days she judged too quickly. Other days she doubted too deeply. And most days she wondered if God regretted choosing her. Why do I keep falling into the same patterns? Why do I still wrestle with things I thought I'd overcome? Maybe I'm not chosen after all. But like a whisper from eternity, the verse rose up from within her, gentle and steady. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. The apostle, the preacher, the church planter. And still he struggled. Naomi exhaled hard. Tears blurred her vision. If Paul, the man who wrote half the New Testament, still had days where he didn't recognize himself, maybe she wasn't disqualified. Maybe she was just still human, still growing, still becoming. You see, the chosen aren't chosen because they're perfect. They're chosen because they keep coming back, even after failing, even after falling, even after telling God, I'll do better next time, and not doing it. The difference isn't in the stumble, it's in the surrender. Naomi didn't need to be flawless. She needed to be faithful. So in that car, parked beneath a cloud-heavy sky, she did something brave. She gave her shame to God. The guilt, the hidden thoughts, the things she couldn't even put into words. She cried, Lord, I'm still struggling, but I'm still yours. And heaven didn't flinch, because the struggle wasn't proof of failure. It was proof that the light inside her was still alive. Every time Naomi chose grace instead of giving up. Every time she came back to prayer even after falling. Every time she reached for God when she felt unworthy. Heaven celebrated, because chosen ones don't walk through life untouched. They walk through life refined, through fire, through doubt, through shadow and storm. Her thoughts weren't perfect. Her actions weren't always holy, but her desire to please God was sacred. Heaven's whisper, you're not weak because you struggle. You're strong because you haven't quit. The war inside you is not disqualification, it's confirmation that you're still in the fight. Part 4. When God asks for what you love, the pain of letting go. The message sat unread. Her ex-fiancé had texted 3 days ago. A simple, hollow line. Hope you're doing okay. Naomi stared at it, fingers hovering, unsure whether to respond or delete it forever. She had loved him, not in the reckless way that fades, but in the sacred, waited on God kind of way. They had prayed together, dreamed together, even picked names for the baby that never came. But something shifted when the miscarriage happened. He stopped calling, stopped praying, until one day he simply Now here she was, months later, with an open message and a broken heart. She wanted closure. She wanted answers. She wanted to ask, "Why didn't you fight for us?" But more than all that, she wanted to obey God's whisper. Let it go. Letting go wasn't just hard. It felt cruel, because it wasn't about releasing something toxic. It was releasing something once holy, something she still loved, something she almost thought was promised. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "God, why do you keep asking me to lay down the things I prayed for?" And that's when she remembered Abraham. God had given him the miracle child. Laughter in old age, fulfillment in flesh. Then, one day, God asked for him back. "Take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him to me." But it wasn't about killing the promise. It was about surrendering the attachment. God didn't want Isaac to die. He wanted to know, "Do I still have your heart when it hurts?" Naomi looked at her phone one last time, breathed deeply, and hit delete. Not out of bitterness, but as an act of obedience, a holy release. Letting go doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like dying. It's choosing God's silence over someone's sweet lies. It's choosing to believe that if God asks for it, He must have something better. People talk about surrender like it's a moment, but for the chosen, surrender is a lifestyle. It's laying down what you thought was the blessing, so God can give you what you never imagined. And in that moment, with an aching heart and trembling hands, Naomi gave God her Isaac, not because she stopped loving, but because she started trusting. Heaven's whisper, "I'm not asking you to give it up because it's bad. I'm asking because it no longer fits the weight of your calling. You're not losing. You're making room. And when the time is right, I'll show you why the letting go was necessary for the overflow." Part 5. The waiting room, when nothing changes. Naomi sat on the same pew she'd sat in for years. Same spot, same view, same prayers whispered under the same flickering sanctuary lights. This morning the pastor preached about harvest season, about sudden breakthroughs. It's about doors flinging open. People shouted, danced, praised. Naomi smiled gently, but inside she felt the slow ache of waiting. It's all real, because for her, nothing had changed. Lady doors, no divine reversals, just silence. After service, she congratulated a couple on their engagement. It watched another friend cradle a newborn. He listened as someone announced a job promotion. Everyone else seemed to be receiving while she kept waiting. She walked out of church quietly, head low, whispering, "Gone? Have you forgotten me?" There's a kind of pain that's harder than heartbreak. It's the pain of watching others be blessed while you still sit in the hallway, still holding a promise, still holding your breath. It's not that Naomi stopped believing. She just didn't know how to hold hope without hurting. But as she sat on a bench outside the church, a verse came to mind. Joseph was in prison, but the Lord was with him. Years between his dream and his deliverance. Years of silence. Years when nothing looked like the vision. But God wasn't absent. He was building. The waiting didn't mean Naomi was disqualified. It meant God was not finished. Because for the chosen, waiting isn't wasted. It's workshop. She remembered what the Spirit had whispered weeks before. If I gave it to you now, you'd rush it. You'd crush it. You're still learning how to carry it. God wasn't being cruel. He was being careful. While Naomi cried in secret, heaven was shifting timelines, arranging hearts, preparing rooms. Not one day was wasted. Even silence was strategy. Even delays were design. It's easy to shout when the miracle comes. The chosen ones, they learn to worship while still in the waiting room. Because worship in the wait is faith without proof. And that kind of faith moves heaven. Naomi looked up at the sky and whispered, "Even when nothing moves, I'll still believe you're working." And somewhere between her pain and her praise, something began to shift. Not around her, within her. Heaven's whisper, you're being refined. And when my timing comes, it won't be a trickle. It will be a torrent. Because you didn't quit in the waiting. The crown was hidden in the fire. Naomi didn't walk out of the valley overnight. She still had quiet days. Still had questions. Still had scars. But something changed. The silence no longer felt like punishment. The loneliness no longer felt like exile. And the pain, it no longer felt pointless. Because now she understood. The pain wasn't evidence that she was forgotten. It was evidence that she was being formed. Every tear she cried in secret. Every goodbye she didn't understand. God authored a season where nothing made sense. Heaven was still writing. She didn't just survive the storm. She became the vessel God would use through it. Not because she was strong, but because she stayed. She stayed when others left. She stayed when hope felt foolish. She stayed when she couldn't feel God, but chose to trust Him anyway. Because chosen ones don't find their purpose in applause. They find it in the pressing. And Naomi? She learned that being crushed didn't mean she was cursed. It meant she carried oil. And now so do you. Yes, you. The one still walking through unanswered prayers. Still healing from the betrayal. Still wondering if God remembers your name. Let me tell you, He never forgot. The pain that tried to kill you was the very proof that you were called. Your deepest wounds were never a sign of weakness. They were spiritual signatures. Locks that said, "This one is mine." If this story found you in the valley, comment, "I'm still standing by grace," so others know they're not alone. Share this message with someone walking through silent suffering. And if this mission touched your spirit, support the journey. Be part of the miracle God is building.